Garrett, let's start with you. We've seen protesters on Capitol Hill. You've been reporting all week about how high the tensions are. Where do things stand this hour?
Well, Nicole, the protest that's happening behind me now, and may make me slightly hard to hear, is by far the largest and most well-organized protest against Brett Kavanaugh that I've seen yet this week. And it's really coming at the right time from the protesters' perspective after this announcement from Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota that she would vote no on Kavanaugh's confirmation. Gave really a boost of energy to the opposition here. The protesters are a few floors down from me. They gave a huge cheer and round of applause just in the direction of Heitkamp's office. A lot of these folks have been coming up here to thank her staff for her vote. Just in terms of the optics of all this, if you will, this is all definitely audible to Joe Manchin's staff and Lisa Murkowski's staff, who are also in this building. You mentioned we're still waiting on Jeff Flake and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, for that matter, on their votes. The Jeff Flake vote is, to me, the most interesting open question at this point. Remember, as of Friday morning last week, he was a yes vote, and then he switched to wanting this FBI investigation. Between what we heard from him this morning, the idea that he appears at least initially satisfied with the FBI investigation, and his initial yes, the longer he goes without saying more, without coming out as a firm yes, and without appearing in front of cameras, and believe me, we have been looking for him all day, that makes me think his support is maybe not as strong as it appeared last Friday. So while things appeared to be moving in the direction of a Kavanaugh confirmation most of the day here today, I wouldn't say the momentum has turned the opposite direction, but it's at least slowed down right now. I think there's more of a question despite the ticking clock towards that first vote tomorrow morning, Nicole.
I'm a train wreck fan, and I recognize Amy Schumer there on the left. Let me just do a little bit of math with you, Garrett, and then I want to bring Kelly O into the conversation. So we've got Collins, Murkowski, Flake, Manchin, and Heitkamp, who is a no vote. How many more votes can Kavanaugh lose and still get confirmed?
He can lose 2, and then Mike Pence would break the tie. So if Manchin holds, and I think it's probably more likely than not that he does, I have a hard time seeing Joe Manchin being the only Democratic no vote. That gets us back to a situation where one of these Republicans can still vote no, and Mike Pence could break the tie. So you still need 2 of these Republicans to come over to no votes to stop this thing.
All right, Kelly O, bring us up to speed on what you're hearing. You've got great sources on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. What do you know?
Well, some interesting things to look at are some of the dynamics here. So Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, will not, I am told, make his position known until tomorrow. So he will not do what Heidi Heitkamp is and put the pin in the balloon and end the speculation. In part, there's a lot of pressure on Joe Manchin in a way that is different than what we saw with Heidi Heitkamp, and it's this. Joe Manchin has been someone who has been very popular in his home state, a former governor who's now been in the Senate for a couple of terms, and he is in a tough race as well this November against the state's Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey. President Trump has been to West Virginia 7 times in the time that he's been in office, brought a lot of pressure there. It is also notable that Manchin and Flake are good friends across the aisle. You could almost imagine a scenario where Jeff Flake decides he's voting no, but Manchin would be a yes. Or you'd have the combination where Murkowski could be a no, and she's got reasons that have to do with Alaska's Native American community and Judge Kavanaugh's record on federal lands and sovereignty as an issue. That's not the thing we talk about typically in national news, but in Alaska, Native American sovereignty, incredibly important. And so there's a dynamic amongst this remaining group that is both political and personal, and we don't yet know if they're sharing their strategy, but that is often the case in the final hours, where if one person sort of needs to take the leap politically and do something risky, they may do it knowing they have cover from someone else. For example, if Flake has to vote no for his conscience, perhaps, but he doesn't want to be a conservative who tanks this nomination, he might try to have the friendship of a Democrat across the aisle vote in his place. You know how that sort of math could work out. We don't have answers to this yet, but that's some of the pressure that's being brought to bear. And for your People magazine moment, Amy Schumer is a cousin of Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat. If you're seeing her in the video, there's a family connection there as well.
It all comes back to 6 degrees of separation, Eugene. This is all, Kelly O's talking about Alaska. Of course, I, having been a Palin staffer, I know all about sovereignty in the state of Alaska and the state politics.
But I did not know that Chuck Schumer and Amy Schumer were related. So Kelly O,
I knew that. I got fired from The View for not knowing anything about celebrities.
Kelly, thank you. I totally did not know that.
Eugene, serve as the statesman, and what is this moment? We see passions on the left here. We see protesters coming out. It looks like the protests after on the day of the inauguration. I mean, this looks like the same nerve that's been struck. But on the other hand, all signs indicate from Collins and Flake's public statements about the FBI report that it gave them perhaps the justification to be a yes vote on Kavanaugh. Yeah,
I totally just heard Garrett's caution there. My assumption all day has been he's going through. He's going to get confirmed. I'm very skeptical that Joe Manchin would be vote number 50 to put him over the top. But assuming that maybe only Flake decides, of the Republicans decides he can't vote for Kavanaugh and everybody else holds, then it's 50-50. Pence breaks a tie. In that scenario, I could see Manchin voting for him because it wouldn't matter in a sense. He'd get through anyhow. I don't think he would be forgiven by the Democratic Party for being the vote that put Kavanaugh over the top.
Kimberly, I can speak to this split screen moment. We've had so many of them since Donald Trump's ascension in American politics, but this undoubtedly is yet another.
It is. I mean, what we're seeing is outside of this confirmation process, this sort of open, bare-knuckled partisan fight that has gender battles in it, that has classism in it, and the patriarchy. It means so much more. Look, I and other journalists have been hearing for weeks now from women who call me and email me just to tell me their stories of sexual assault and how appalled they are at how the women who are coming forward are being treated. Whether you believe them or not, whether you believe Judge Kavanaugh or not, that's an aside. It's the treatment of these women and this idea that the president and others are saying this is a dangerous time for men, when they say this has been a dangerous time for women for a long time. And at the other side of it, you see people who are tagging Democrats saying all they want to do is keep this seat open. So we're seeing all of these politics play out and the cultural divide play out over this Supreme Court nomination. It's really extraordinary.
Can you think of a time, Chuck, when the FBI has been thrust into the middle of a moment that Kimberly Atkins just accurately described?
Not quite like this, Nicole, and that's what pains me, frankly. I mean, the last thing the FBI wants to be is in the middle of politics. And here, I'm afraid, I don't predict a lot of things, and I don't predict well, but I predicted from the outset that they were in a box, and that if their investigation was circumscribed, then they would be blamed for not doing a full investigation.
Right.
And that is exactly where they find themselves. And so it's deeply unfortunate. It's not where they want to be, and I can't think of a parallel.
Do you think the fact that Collins and Flake came out and said that what they'd seen in the report was satisfying to them, that was the word they used, what does that mean about the report? That seems to indicate that it was good information for Kavanaugh.
Probably, Nicole. It probably means it was at least more corroborative of what he claimed happened or didn't happen than what Dr. Ford claimed.
But he's claiming, as you just said, you were trying to prove a negative with him. So I'm guessing they had more character accounts. I'm just trying to understand what the substance of the investigation was. When Ford spoke to the Washington Post, she called for an investigation into her allegations, which would have required that kind of long lead.
Much broader. Much broader.
So did they have the time to do the kind of investigation Ford was calling for, or did they simply go out and find more character witnesses for Kavanaugh?
Well, they certainly had the time. Remember, they have 13,000 agents. It's not like two folks driving around the country in a beat-up Ford trying to track down witnesses. And the FBI has the capacity to do this. They didn't have the authority. And so I'm not, if they ask for a deadline, if they say we'd like this back by Friday, that part doesn't trouble me. But imagine a bank robbery where you had 5 tellers and they said, you know what, Nicole, pick 3. You can talk to any 3 tellers that you want, but not the other 2. That's not how you do investigations.
Frank Figluzzi, can you hear us? Do we have Frank up yet?
I sure can.
Frank, can you pick up this thread?
Yes.
Can you talk about, because this is something you've been sounding the alarm on, that if it turns out that they didn't have the authority, that would be more indicative of how this was going to turn out than capacity or intellect or ability. It seems like that's exactly where we've landed.
Yeah, this certainly appears to be the case, that the constraints were so tight that we're left reportedly, if accurate, with 9 or 10 interviews perhaps. And as Chuck said, that's not how you do this. Let's talk about the most routine of applicant investigations. Somebody's applying to be an FBI agent. You go out, you do the background. The candidate has given you the name of all their friends and loved ones who will say great things and be references for them. Your job as that investigator is to talk to them and then at the end say, well, who else should I talk to? Who doesn't like this candidate? That's your job. So essentially what sounds like has happened is the White House said, talk to the references, talk to the ones that aren't going to tell us the bad things, and only do that. For me, this is an institutional moment for the FBI. For Director Chris Wray, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't moment. Damned if he followed the rules, written protocols of backgrounds with the White House. Damned if he doesn't come out and ask for more. Damned if he doesn't give a statement saying here to the public, here's how we do backgrounds, and damned if he doesn't. Damned if he doesn't call for reform of the background investigation process and the client relationship with the White House, and probably fired if he comes out and does that. This is a conundrum, I'm sure, that has people sequestered on the 7th floor of the Hoover building.
Let me get one more follow-up to both of you, because Professor Ford's attorney is out with a pretty damning statement about today's FBI. Ford's attorney saying, quote, the investigation conducted over the past 5 days is a stain on the process, on the FBI, and on our American ideal of justice. You first, Frank.
Well, look, the FBI motto is fidelity, bravery, integrity. And the question is, you know, the FBI is filled with excellent rule followers. They do the right thing. As Chuck said, they do not want to be in the limelight. They do not want to be in politics. But this is where they are right now. So the decision is, what does fidelity, bravery, and integrity mean right now? And does it mean that the director needs to make some form of statement? When does that happen? Will he respond to congressional questions? This is a painful, painful moment for the FBI.
I'll put you on the spot, Chuck. Does he need to respond to questions? Does he need to respond to Professor Ford's attorney, who says that the past 5 days are a stain on the process, on the FBI, and our American ideal of justice?
So first, does Chris Wray need to say something? He at least, I think, needs to say something to his people, to the FBI, because they watch the news too, and they're all over the world. And so I would think at the very least you would want to go out in some way, in an all-hands email, and say, look, here's what happened, here's what we did, here's why I did what we did, here's my decision-making process. I think that's imperative. Whether or not he makes a public statement, I think is much more difficult, because again, to Frank's point, whatever he says can be turned against the FBI. So there's communicating to your own people, which I think is very important, and there's that much more difficult decision about it communicating externally.
And he did that at one other point, either after the McCabe firing or after the Nunes memo. There was one other flashpoint in this presidency where he did find it.
And look, and Frank's right. I mean, the men and women of the FBI are extraordinary. And they don't want to be in this position, and they do want to hear from their leadership. They want to understand what the thinking is. They may disagree, they may agree.
But they want to feel like good guys. I mean, I've covered the FBI long enough that they want to feel like they're on the just side of things, and I wonder if this whole episode has made them question that.
Well, they know in their hearts why they're there and what they do. This is a different thing. This is not a place where they want to be. This is not a place where they're comfortable, because this is politics. And frankly, FBI doesn't do politics, and they don't do it well. So I hope that Chris Wray communicates with his people, because they need to hear from him.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell, thank you for your great reporting. We're grateful to have you. If you have anything else in the next hour, please jump back in front of that camera for us. We'd love to hear from you. When we come back, the debate over who benefits politically from the Kavanaugh fight is as fractured as the debate itself. We'll show you how strategists on both sides of the growing partisan divide see the emotional debate over Kavanaugh shaping the midterms. And brand new reporting from the Washington Post about White House counsel Don McGahn's last stand. Unceremoniously shown the door by Donald Trump on Twitter weeks ago, McGahn is working feverishly behind the scenes to reshape the Supreme Court on his way out. That story's next.